Good afternoon, and welcome to the Urban League's Digital Career Success Series, brought to you by the Urban League Jobs Network and hosted by me, Jody Brockington, and looking forward to today's topic, Refresh, Reboot, Revive Your Resume. For most of us, resumes are usually the first entree and introduction that we have to a business or a job that we would love to have. However, it can also stop you from getting the job that you want, depending on the content and then what's in there. Today, we have a guest, a true FOJ, a true friend of Jody, Lucy Sorrentini, who's a strategy consultant and leadership coach with plenty of years in the HR sector. She's worked across sectors, mostly in corporate, and was the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Booz Allen Hamilton. So she knows her stuff. She's seen all kinds of resumes, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And today she's going to make sure that we are all putting our best resume forward, no matter what kind, type, and those that you need. So please follow along. If you have any questions, please send those in, as well as tweet them to the Urban League Jobs Network, that's UL Jobs Network, or to me at Friends of Jody, and we will get started. I want to introduce Lucy. She is an FOJ we just spent the last few months at the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program, getting our businesses up and going. So she left corporate America to work on her own and ensure that people like you get the jobs that they want as this world becomes a little bit more colorful and more women are entering the workplace. So Lucy, welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say today and enlightening this crowd as you always do.
Excellent. Jody, thank you so much, and those of you on the phone, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to ask that we start with the first slide. Great. So by way of background, and Jody did speak a little bit about it already, I am the founder and CEO of Impact Consulting, LLC. I launched my firm a year ago, and my company focuses on talent strategies and solutions, primarily for the Fortune 1000 companies. Our vision is basically to transform the world of business one leader at a time and really focus on developing inclusive leaders that are driving change. Jody mentioned that the world of business becomes more colorful. We're going to talk a lot about that as well, and the slides in and of themselves are somewhat colorful. For us, it's really, the focus is on finding the right talent for our clients, helping our clients identify the right talent, because as you can imagine, that's a huge priority for them. And I basically want to start out by sharing with you guys just a few stats. I want to start with a statistic around women, which is basically that women today make up nearly 50% of the U.S. workforce. In addition to that, when we consider people of color make up 1/3. And yet, less than 10% of top leadership positions across the United States, and that's both in the public and private sector, are made up of women or people of color. So for many of us on the phone, myself included, you know, we're often asking, so why is that the case, and what can we do to shift that paradigm? And while that's not the purpose of today's discussion, there is a direct correlation to what we're talking about today. Because today's discussion is really focused on how do we ensure that those of us that are on this webinar, how do we ensure that we are positioning ourselves in the right way and that we are putting our best selves, our best resumes forward. So today, when we talk about revising and rebooting and refreshing our resume, the focus is really on doing exactly that. Because whether you're on the phone and you are currently a leader, or whether you are an individual who is maybe younger in career, or maybe this is a second career and you have aspirations to be a leader, the reality is that there is a great focus on, you know, knowing your brand and communicating your brand. And in my prior role, even before my role now as CEO of my own company, as Chief Diversity Officer for Booz Allen, which is a global consulting firm, I can tell you over my tenure, and it was with the firm more than 15 years, I probably reviewed myself several thousand resumes. We used to get about 6,000 resumes a month, and clearly I had a team, so I didn't review all of them. But we would get 6,000 resumes a month. And so often it's hard to differentiate one from the other. So I'm going to speak to you now as we move into the next slide about the value proposition. If I haven't already told you, we're going to talk about why this is important. So the value proposition, why refresh, reboot, and revise your resume? And for me, as I think about it, I really talk about, when I talk with my clients, about the value proposition. So what is their employer value proposition when they're looking at staff and they're considering individuals for positions? What are these companies looking for? And I specifically, at every interview, I ask them, and what are they delivering back to the talent base? So what are they giving? What are they putting out? How are they putting their best selves forward so that you as individuals and as candidates could identify whether that company is the right fit for you? The same exact thing applies to the individual on the other end. If you're applying for a job, you've got to be very clear on what the value proposition is that you're bringing forth. And it's critical that you understand and you take a look at this resume process, not as something that you dread, although I've been guilty of that too. I think we all have, right? Writing a resume is not necessarily something you put on the top of your to-do list and something that you're normally very excited about. And yet we recognize that writing and revising resumes are critical to our professional success. So part of this is a shift in mindset. It's shifting from taking it away from what is a tactical action and moving it out of the box that says we're going to procrastinate around it, but instead putting it as a priority and thinking about the resume as something that's really helping with our brand strategy. Now, I know a lot of times, even for those of us that do get it done, once we actually write the resume, then typically what happens is, you write it, you get it out, maybe you get the job, you might not, but either way, you get it done once, and then you tend not to look at it again, and you tend not to revise it until the next time another opportunity comes forward. So I think for us, part of this is not only understanding the broader strategic value of what the resume represents and really looking at it as an integral part of your personal brand strategy, but also recognizing that at the end of the day, with or without it, right, your brand is the essence of who you are, and it's the essence of what you stand for. And it's basically going to be what people are going to be saying about you, whether or not you're in the room. And oftentimes, your resume becomes the only view a prospective employer or client or teammate is going to have around who you are and what you're about and what you've accomplished. So basically, any opportunity to reinforce this message is going to be critically important. So now let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the types of resumes, because I'm sure you've heard about a few. You probably have even worked through a couple of them, but I want to go through those to set the baseline for what's out there by way of resume types. So there are basically four. You can't quite read the last bullet. The last bullet is a targeted resume, and quite frankly, the third and the fourth, hybrid and targeted, I'll probably talk about in tandem. Let me start with the chronological resume. The chronological resume is probably the most commonly used format. These resumes are listing work history in chronological order, and it's starting with your most recent job. Across America, so most firms prefer the chronological resume because it enables employers to really have a quick snapshot of your work history. And if you're using this resume, it enables you to tailor it based on your most recent job experience up front, which more often than not more closely resembles or aligns to the next opportunity that you're going for. So if you're completing a chronological resume, chances are the experience you had 10 years ago, while helpful, is probably not going to be as helpful as the experience you had a few years ago for this next opportunity. So when you're thinking about which type of resume to use, you would use a chronological resume if you have a solid work history, so you've worked, X number of years, your experience is aligned to the job that you're applying for, and you have no lapses in employment. So basically, you've gone from one opportunity to the next opportunity, and even if there was a little bit of a lapse, you don't have significant lapses of employment, you would likely use a chronological resume. You might, if you chose not to use a chronological resume, the second option would be a functional resume. A functional resume, similar to a chronological resume, is including the same basic information. The difference is that you're starting with your skills and experiences up front. So your employment history then becomes secondary to your skills, your experiences, your abilities. The employment history itself becomes secondary. And this type of resume is de-emphasizing the dates in which you worked. So if you happen to have a lapse in employment, or maybe you're in a middle career transition, maybe you're even a recent college graduate and you have limited work experience, right? Maybe only your intern experience. Or you have a diverse background with no clear career path. So you've had lots of different experiences. They don't quite match up. They don't quite show a normal career trajectory. Then you might consider functional, because functional enables you to upfront list your skills and experiences and capture the attention of your prospective employer by focusing on those abilities. Okay, the third type, and I mentioned the third, hybrid and targeted, we can talk about kind of in tandem. The third type, being the hybrid, is what I would call a combination resume. So this one is including your skills and abilities and experiences, but it's also backing it up with a chronological listing of your work history. So in essence, you're merging the two together. The hybrid resumes provide the maximum flexibility, so they better align with the position you are seeking more often than not. So yes, they have a chronological element, yes, they have a functional element, but what you're doing is you're also taking a look at the type of positions that you're looking you're considering and those that you're looking to fill. And with a hybrid, you just create flexibility around how you bring in those elements together. For those of you that are interested in what constitutes one versus the other, we're going to talk a little bit more in some of the future slides, but the truth is if you just do a Google search of chronological resumes or sample functional resumes or best hybrid resumes, you are going to get a wealth of information just from the internet around different styles and types. I would also encourage you that as you're doing your searches around styles and types to consider, that you also consider, and we'll talk about this more with best practices, that you also consider the industry and or the position that you're interested in, because that's also going to dictate which of these resume types are likely better for you. And then with the targeted one, the only thing that I would say that is a little bit unique from the hybrid, while they're similar, it's a little bit unique, is that the targeted one is really, no kidding, you are going to update that resume based on the position that you're seeking. So if you have an opportunity in front of you, you are basically almost going to mirror that opportunity in your own resume. And while that has several benefits for that particular job and for that particular employer, the reality is that if for some reason you don't get that job, you're likely going to have to do several different iterations and versions. So sometimes the targeted resume, while on one hand it's very positive and it's very successful, on the other hand, it creates a lot more work for individuals who are often producing 3, 4, 5, 6 copies of a resume. And really anything more than 2 is probably overkill. I mean, that's really going to be hard to manage. So I'd encourage you, when you think about resume types, think about the first 3. And I think you could still get targeted within the third one, which is the hybrid, but really the chronological, the functional, and the hybrid are probably the ones that will be most practical for you as you move forward. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to talk a little bit about some resume basics. I'm not sure for those of you that are on the phone, I believe most of us, if not all of us, have at least completed one resume in our lifetime, in our careers. I think for the most part, even children, now in middle school in some cases are starting resume workshops as part of their middle school, and definitely high school and college, we know. I'm not necessarily going to read everything that's on this one page for you, but there are some very specific categories. You see to the left different elements that are required. To the right, those that I would consider to be more optional. So while required, well, optional ones are not necessarily ones that you have to add. I mean, they have benefit for sure. When you look at the first column, the required, you absolutely want to make sure that everything that's on here is covered in some way, shape, or form on your resume. I think I mentioned to you I looked at several thousand in my career, and I can tell you it just never surprises me how much gets left out, or when too much is included. And you have to think back and say, at the end of the day, some of these are going to move forward, some of these are not. But when you look at everything from contact information all the way down to associations and networks that you are currently a member of or have been a member of, you absolutely want to make sure that's included on your resume. The flip side is also when you look at optional, while these are optional, sometimes these elements of your objectives, your summary of skills and abilities, your reference statement, can sometimes be the one thing that really pulls your resume out of the stack and puts it up to top for review. So the right balance of these are critical for you as you think about your resume. But again, the highlight on this page is about ensuring that everything that is required is in fact included on your resume. I now want to kind of shift gears a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about best practices. So it's interesting with this one, right? With the earlier page, I said I'm not going to go through every single item because you can read it, and I think, Jody, I believe they're going to have copies of the slides, right? So you all have the copies of the slides that you can refer back to. This one I do want to go over, and the main reason why I want to go over is because clearly in part they're best practices, so these are going to be the things that set your resume apart from others. But I can also tell you that when not done, they become worst practices. They become, I think Jody mentioned the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? These become the bad and the ugly when not adhered to. So I just want to quickly go over them. Highlighting qualifications and skills. Sometimes some of us are a little bashful, and we find in our studies, especially for women and people of color, we tend not to highlight our strengths, our skills, our abilities. We're somewhat humble. And this is the one opportunity that I would say that you have to really, really get out of your comfort zone and really brag and boast about those qualifications and accomplishments. So that's the first thing I want to highlight. The second thing is where you have gaps. I mean, if you had a gap in employment, you were unemployed for 2 years, you decided to take, a year off to travel, maybe you took a year off before you started employment, you shouldn't necessarily have to run from it, but you do want to explain it. Whether it be in a cover letter, whether it be in the next opportunity that you're listed, you do want to explain why there was a gap. And if possible, again, maybe through a different type of resume, you can avoid it if you focus, let's say, on the functional resume as an example. The third element is around using action words to define responsibilities and experience. Keep the tense of what you're using in your resume consistent, and make sure that there are action-oriented words that are used to describe those responsibilities and experiences, including, if it was a past tense experience, make sure that you list it as a past tense experience. Visually powerful and easy to read. For individuals like myself and others in the human capital space, and hiring managers, quite frankly, if you're looking at 10, 20, 30 resumes a day, 50, 100 a week, 1,000 a month, whatever it is, the reality is you want that resume that's going to jump off the page. Something that's begging to be read because the color, the font size, the clarity by which it was written is very powerful. The opening statement is very powerful. So what I would encourage you to do is really think about, as you review it, as you write it, think about whether you have a visual representation that's powerful and easy to read for those that are receiving your resume on the other end. And despite what some in industry might say, for those of us that are more tenured and experienced, less is more. Anything more than 2 pages is likely too long. I can't tell you how many events I attended, recruiting events for seasoned professionals who were really taken back by the fact that the recruiter only had the first 2 pages of their resume, and all the important stuff was written on pages 3 and 4, right? So the reality is that if you can't tell your story, if you can't get your pitch out, if you can't communicate your brand on 2 pages or less, then chances are you're being too wordy. Because at the end of the day, right, everybody is busy, and each of these recruiting managers and hiring managers, they've got to get through so many of these resumes at once. So here is really one that I say less is more, and you absolutely, want to consider no more than 2 pages for your resume. Checking on grammar and spelling is something else. Pretty straightforward, right? Self-explanatory. However, even with spell check, there are some words that will be picked up as correct, and yet in the context of how they're written, they are incorrect. The famous, there, T-H-E-R-E, T-H-E-I-R. Which one are we using? They may both come up as correct on spell check, so you want to make sure that you're checking both for grammar and spelling. Customizing your resume for industry and position type, this is the other thing. If you're going in for a position within management consulting versus retail versus healthcare, while that might not necessarily change the type of resume you use, you do want to consider how you might want to customize the language. what you might want to highlight depending on the industry you're going for and or depending on the position. Because again, the goal of this is really to connect who you are with the opportunity that's available and the opportunity that you're interested in. So being able to customize where appropriate by industry or position is something that would be critical. Including inappropriate personal information, again, if you just do a Google search, first resumes, you will see some stuff out there and you'll think, how is it possible? This has got to be a joke, right? People don't really put this on a resume. I can tell you, having reviewed so many of these that people do, most companies don't need to know about your marital status. In fact, they shouldn't even be asking about that during an interview. That's not legal. You should not be doing that as an HR practice. Most people, don't need to know about, the fact that on personal time you enjoy wine tasting. I mean, sometimes it's an appropriate place to share a little bit more about who you are. But again, remember that your resume is a professional representation of who you are. And while many employers want to see the totality of who you are, you have to balance how much and what type of personal information you use. The next one is around presenting your data in chronological order. And again, for a functional resume, that would not be the case. But the other thing that I have seen in industry is that some individuals are writing this real quick, and they'll have their most recent position, then they'll have a position that was 3 positions ago, then they'll flip back. Sometimes there are overlapping positions. There are some individuals that might do a part-time opportunity along with a full-time. So you want to make sure that when you're looking at the dates that they do in fact match up if you are completing a chronological resume. And then last is you absolutely want to be 100% truthful. There are ways to state it. There are ways to, exaggerate, embellish, overshare. There are different things that you can do, but at the end of the day, you either have the skill or you don't. I would push you and I would encourage you. Sometimes we don't see the skills that we have, and often we're talking with somebody else, whether it be a coach, whether it be a peer, a mentor, a colleague, somebody that you trust, that they can do a better job, I think, at articulating some of the individual strengths. So you want to pair up with somebody to make sure that what you're representing is indeed accurate. You never want to share an experience that you didn't realistically have, whether it be a job experience or whether it be a skill. You absolutely want to be truthful. And at the end of the day, just going back to this list, and I would almost say that this is probably a helpful list that when you go back to revise your resume, just have it in front of you and do a quick check off of each of these items. I mean, these are the main ones that come up. There are probably a handful of others as well, but these are the main ones that I have seen, and I would put them both on the best practice list and the repeat offender list when I think about some of those resumes that have been less than optimal. And quite frankly, from a hiring manager and a recruiting manager perspective, when these things, these errors appear, when you don't have a best practice resume, chances are that resume is going to the bottom of the pile and may in some cases not even be reviewed. As I mentioned with the resume that had 4 pages, right? That individual's page 1 and page 2 came forward, but nothing around education came forward. If he had actually moved forward with just 2 pages, the recruiter would have had his information. Samples, we're going to move to the next slide. Just these, again, you're going to be able to Google this on your own and find all different types of sample resumes. The one on the left is probably more the traditional resume, and as you see, this individual prepared a high-level professional summary. So this is somebody with multiple work experiences. She prepared a high-level, she or he, Kareem, prepared a high-level professional summary, listed some of the areas of expertise, and then went right into the work history. So this is, I would say, probably more of a combination or a hybrid resume. On the right, this individual shared a picture of himself and also shared some more specifics, in addition to the photo, around licenses and publicity and other relevant facts to really set themselves apart. I often get asked, around what my recommendation would be around including or not including a photo. I think that it has its merits, both plus and minus, I would say. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If you do decide that you're going to include a photo, I personally like individuals to include photos because it enables me to see the person before an actual physical interview. But I would say that it absolutely has to be a professional photo. Do not, and I repeat, do not send a photo, a casual photo as part of your resume. Do not send one of you with somebody cut out of the picture. Yes, people have done that as well. If it's a professional photo, I think it's totally appropriate. If it's a creative field, then graphics and photos and that sort of thing are definitely welcome. But if you're not sure, then I would leave the photo out. If you do have a professional photo, absolutely include it. Definitely very helpful. We're going to transition to the next slide. Other considerations. I asked you all to keep track of trends, not so much where you are today, but where you're going next. So as I think about the audience, right, from what I understand, we have young professionals on the phone. We may even have a few or some college graduates or recent graduates. We may have mid-career individuals, folks that are completing a brand new second career, different career, as well as individuals that may have been out of the workforce and are coming back. So there's a mix. What I would say is keep track of trends based on where you are and more importantly, where you're looking to go. So video resumes are popping up quite a bit, and there's some industries, you can imagine, some of the more creative industries where video resumes have become more of a commonplace. And it enables an individual to tell their story, almost a pitch. So rather than reading a two-page document, you actually get a real good and clear sense of who the individual is and what their skills are. And it's completed in a video format. That is not by any means the norm. Traditional resume is still the norm. But again, all of this is going to be specific to what industry you're going for and where you are looking to position yourself. And quite frankly, if you're not even today in the market to go for another job, I would still encourage you, I would challenge you to take an opportunity over the next week or two to actually sit down and apply some of the principles that we're talking about today and revise and refresh your resume. I mean, I think it just makes it easier for folks to go ahead and have an updated resume at hand so that when the opportunity presents itself, you're not having to go back and create 10 years worth of experience, but instead that you have something that's updated and that's just within easy reach that you can quickly tweak and send off to a prospective client or to a prospective employer. I mentioned previously about reviewing sample resumes. Definitely take a look at what's out there. You can find great, Microsoft Office has some great templates. So it's not like, 10, 15, 20 years ago where you had to pay somebody to write this for you. There are many, many templates, and they can all be, changed by way of color and font size so that you personalize them. I have seen color resume. I wouldn't make them too colorful. I think, again, it's in the theme and in the scheme of keeping them professional in nature and at the same time tweaking them to your personality. Also consider the impact of scanned resumes and any scanned attachments. That's something else that I've seen through my career where individuals scanned a resume, and when the resume was uploaded, half of the resume on the right or on the left or on the bottom got left out. Some of the words somehow got mushed together, so they were hard to read the labels. Some of the alignment got missed, and I would never have thought that that would be the case just through a scan. However, that does happen. So when you are scanning a resume, definitely think of the impact of that and maybe scan it to yourself before you scan it to a prospective employer. And then when you're done, I've listed here, conduct a media audit. The other thing is, for those of you that are very active on social media and that have gotten your resume to different sites, whether it be, Monster or some of the other sites out there, that you make sure that when you update your resume, you are going back to update that resume in all these other outlets where you have posted your resume previously, or maybe where you cut a piece of your resume and posted your skills and abilities, that there is some consistency. So keeping track of whatever you have out in social media related to your resume is going to be critical. That's something else that employers check on. So when they receive Jody Brockington's resume and they look at the resume she's presented, and then they Google Jody and they're looking at her social media and how Jody presents herself, if she's saying in the resume that she is a functional subject matter expert in technology, and everything in social media is talking about her expertise in retail, there's obviously a disconnect, right? So we want to make sure that from an audit perspective that you are on top of how it is that you're communicating your brand, what it is that you're sharing on your resume, and that it's consistent with all the other media outlets that you have. Cover letter. I often get asked, so should we have a cover letter? Should we not have a cover letter? It really depends. I mean, more often than not, a cover letter or a cover email, quite frankly, is a good thing. Oftentimes it gets read, but then it gets detached from the resume. But it does give you an ability to do a couple of things, which is why I encourage people to, yes, send a cover letter or send a cover email that is very much formatted like a letter, because there are a couple of things that you can convey in that cover letter. One is that you can provide enough information to really interest and capture the reader. You know, hopefully your resume will do that in and of itself, but what's the sentence or two that you can share with the reader that is showing confidence in your abilities? So it's showcasing your skill set, and it's showing confidence in your abilities in one or two sentences. You're not revising your resume, right? So this is not about just creating a cut and paste of your resume and putting it on a letter, but it's a way to open up the conversation with somebody that you might not otherwise be able to meet. So what is it you can share and express by way of confidence in your abilities? That would go on a cover letter. I would also recommend that you research the company and you research the opportunity. Sometimes it does take a little investigative work, and I can tell you that, you know, I've always been impressed with people who are very resourceful or have been very resourceful in finding me when I was with my former employer and even former employers, because they looked at the job, and if the job, for example, was a diversity position, they would call the company and said, hey, can you transfer me over to the head of diversity? And then the call would get transferred, and they'd speak to the EA, and they would, tell them who they were, and they would get my name and number, and that resume, while it was being sent to a recruiter, would also get sent to me, right? So there's an opportunity for you to do a little homework and research the company, identify who's hiring for the position if you can, the team or the function, so that you're able to, where possible, mention the ad and the person who referred you, but also direct the letter to the individual on the other end, the receiving end. And then for those of you on the phone who, again, fall in the category of being humble, where, I kind of feel uncomfortable about this. I don't know if I have the skills or abilities. I love the opportunity. I think I would be great at this job, but I'm not sure. I don't have everything the job is asking for. There are 10 things listed and I only have 6. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to apply. Absolutely not. General rule of thumb, and we as employers and we as recruiters know this. General rule of thumb is that if you qualify for 50%, so half or more of the skills required, you want to apply. Now, I say that with one caveat. You absolutely must have the core requirement of the job, right? So if they ask for 10 things and the core requirement, for example, as a nurse, is that you be licensed, and you're not licensed, then don't apply for that job, even if you have the other 8, because that one criteria is critical. So you absolutely want to look at the position description closely. Typically, position descriptions will talk about what are core requirements and what are secondary requirements. When you look at the opportunity combined, if you match 50% or more, and if the core requirement is filled, you absolutely want to apply. Again, for my women and people of color out there, of which I am one as well, I can tell you that we do ourselves a disservice every time we turn around and we say we're not qualified. In comparison, men more so than women tend to do a better job at this, and good for them. I think we need to learn from that. But I think, this is one of those areas that I would say definitely, stretch yourself a little bit. And if you think you meet the qualifications, put your name in the hat. And then, provide in that letter also a concise overview. So this is where I was saying, don't rehash everything on your resume. But this may be where you want to put that high-level summary, that talks about, in 1 or 2 sentences, your high-level skills and qualifications. And rather than send the resume off to the black hole, where possible, if you can identify the name of the, and address it to somebody in the company, and or mention, the ad and where you saw the ad and or who referred you, that would also be very helpful to ensuring that your resume makes it to the right source. So I'd like to kind of end with bringing it all together, right? I know there are, I believe, 84 of you on the line, or a little under 100 of you on the line, and I'm sure that you joined for different reasons. I thank you for joining, and I appreciate your being here. I just want to make sure that as you're thinking about the why you joined, this whole element of the conversation was where we started, right? Writing a resume is not a tactical action. This is about how you showcase your brand. This is just one way of many that you're showcasing who you are, what you're about, what your skills and abilities are, and you're looking to draw people in. I mean, that's the whole purpose of writing a resume, right? It's not to repel them, it's to bring them in. So thinking through your strategy, why are you on the call today? Is it because you're interested in your next opportunity? Is it because you just haven't updated your resume in 10 years and you want to have it updated? Is it because you're not sure what's happening in the market space or you're going for your first opportunity? Understand the strategy and the rationale for why you're even on this call and the commitment to action. So, I'm guessing that most of you are not just on this call because you wanted to meet me and hear the presentation, but more that you want to capture elements of what you've learned and apply them. So here's where the action comes in, and when I work with my clients, whether you're a Fortune 1000 CEO or whether you are a 2-year, tenured young woman who wants to break into technology space and not quite sure how to do it, I often give the same feedback and the same counsel, which is strategy in and of itself is just a word, right? You've got to put your strategy into action. So think about how that strategy then becomes tangible action. When will you revise your resume? How will you do that? What will you include? The results, ultimately the results. So once you have this completed resume, what are you going to do with it and who are you going to share it with? And how are you going to follow up to make sure that that resume gets to where it needs to go to support and fulfill the strategy? So with that, I am going to wrap up. Thank you again for participating on the call and being here with us today. I believe Jody is going to be taking any questions and comments, but again, I really appreciate the time. And if you don't hear it in my voice, I mean, this is an area I am extremely passionate in, and if we can do or provide to help you, we are here to do that. Thank you.
Lindsay, thank you so much. There are so many questions. So luckily, a lot of questions are kind of the same, so I tend to condense them, and you and I can kind of discuss them. But one that just came up, but has come up throughout, but I think is one of the most important things is, what do you actually do with your resume to not let it hit a black hole electronically? When you sign up for jobs online, when you're sending it in, what's the best tactic of making sure that it is actually seen?
I would say a couple of things, and I'll be honest, I mean, it's not even just these broader sites where there's an issue, right? Hey, Jody, are you there?
Yes, I am. Alicia?
I just heard some noise in the background.
I am. Yeah.
Okay, so what I was going to say is that, unfortunately, the whole notion of this black hole, and I know the frustration, and trust me, even with my former employer, I mean, there were times that I was reluctant to refer anybody because the responsibility of getting back to people just wasn't happening, and this was not even a monster or large, independent site. This is actually a company site, because, as I mentioned, we were getting 6,000 resumes a day, and while it's, a month, and not 6,000 a day, that would be way too many, but 6,000 a month. But again, I think there are a couple of things that individuals could do. One is follow up. We had people that would sometimes send 5 and 6 copies of the resume. I mean, I would suggest that you not do 5 or 6 copies in the same day. But if you haven't heard back in a week, resend. If you haven't heard back in a week after that, resend. So and in some cases, that third hit was the one that got noticed. To the extent that you can identify a name, and I talked about this earlier, if you're applying directly to a company, and I know many of you are, you absolutely want to get the name of the hiring manager, the recruiter, the functional leader. There were many times when I was at Booz Allen Hamilton that I would get a call from the EA of the CEO's office. I mean, some people were bold enough to call right up to the CEO. I don't encourage you to do that all the time, but there were some people that were bold enough to call up to the CEO's office and say, hey, I'm really interested in this position. I reached out to the company, nobody has gotten back to me, and through that EA, the call would come to my desk as a senior leader of the company, and I was specifically asked to make the call. So that does happen. Again, I would encourage you to leverage the other channels where possible, and not necessarily go to the CEO, But when all else fails, it doesn't hurt to try, right? Because the worst that can happen is that nobody at that level gets back to you. But typically, it's not persistent.
Yeah, no, so the two best things, too, just on your resume alone, if you have not made a personal connection, the more keywords that are involved in the job description, if they are also showing up on your resume, they will be picked up a lot faster than if you're coming up with your own jargon. So use the jargon of your industry as well as what's in that resume. I mean, we all took, English 101 in elementary school. Answer the question with the question. So the more of what's on your resume electronically that is also in the job description will give you a better chance for it to pick up if you did not know someone like Lucy on the other side. And then this is where the rubber hits the road of my major issue of networking. So definitely always try to find a person. It will definitely get you farther. The other big question is people have, on this call, a lot of folks have been in and out of a lot of jobs, have a lot of great skills. They don't particularly connect. They could have done some engineering, but then they're doing some marketing, or they want to switch a sector. How do you do that with your resume? How do you keep the transferable skills and go after something new and also don't look like you're going to run away from the next job?
Right. So there are a couple of things there, and I'm glad you raised them. I'm actually very happy that you made the earlier comment about the key words. I didn't speak about that. I did speak in the slide about making your resume role and industry specific, and I should have called that out, Jody, but that's an excellent point that I want to highlight, which is those keywords are critical. So if you're looking for something in banking and finance and you're not using the right words, or you're still using the ones in the health sector, that's not going to get you noticed. So I want to underscore that and say that's critically important. On the second question that you just asked, there are a couple of things. I think one is, really think about those skills. I often meet with clients, and I have in the past, both in the corporate world and in my own business now, where they'll say, well, Lucy, I don't have that skill. I've been a banker my whole life, or I'm an MBA, I'm finance, now I want to do something around life coaching, and that doesn't really fit. And I'm looking at them across the table, and I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Of course it fits. So really have a conversation with yourself, with somebody that you trust, with a mentor, with a peer, and just begin to brainstorm all the things that you bring to the table. Because sometimes it's just a matter of tweaking the language so that it better fits with the new entity, the new organization, or the new role. At the end of the day, right, have you, program management. I mean, there are program management folks that are, PMP certified. Okay, you can't fake that. You either have it or you don't. But you're not going to tell me that even as college students that you don't have program management experience. Of course you do. You've done it, getting through one semester and another semester and submitting your deliverables. If you're active on campus, if you're active with a fraternity or sorority, even at the junior most levels, you do have this experience. So I think there's an opportunity to speak about an experience in a way that is transferable. The other thing that I would say is this requirement for, if you are in fact going into a brand new industry, then you should really think about what are ways to bring yourself up to speed. A course, a webinar, a training, a tutorial, a library series. I mean, there's a networking event. There's so many different ways to get yourself exposure and give yourself visibility, so get both visibility and exposure, so that when you then put forth your resume for consideration, that in the cover letter or otherwise you can indicate, my experience has been an X in the past, but oh, by the way, I've recently done this, and here's where it applies. And then the third thing I would say, and this is where the personal piece for me is very personal, while I advised earlier not to share inappropriate, personal information, know when too much is too much, I often find that we don't talk enough about who we are. Let's share our passion. I have had a passion for development and developing people and supporting underserved communities my whole life. And it wasn't until pretty recently, the last 5 years, that I said, you know what, I want to talk about this as part of my brand. I just don't want to do it. I was doing it. But I want to talk about it. It's who I am. And I can't tell you how many more phone calls I've gotten and how many more opportunities have been presented to me, because what employers and what clients are seeing is somebody who is very functionally competent, but somebody who's also very passionate in this work. And when you put confidence and passion together, you'd be amazed at how much you can achieve. So the reality is, I would say those three things, Jody, in answer to that question, is that if we could just, really think about how you do speak about those transferable skills, so that, you are able to talk about them in this new language. Get yourself out there. Get yourself some exposure secondarily, and there are different ways to do that, some of which don't cost any money, just time. And then the third piece is connect with that passion and be able to tell that story so that you bring it all together.
Yeah, as your passion and your confidence sets you apart, the other thing that there's quite a few of the questions that came up about what are some of the best practices of usage of bullet points versus sentences throughout your resume? When is it more important to just kind of list a few things that you've done versus explain what you have done in those same spaces?
Yeah. So that's
I speak from if you're mid-career, sometimes it becomes a little tricky to still get yourself on 2 pages, so you do a lot of bulleting, but you want something to be said. So where's the balance,
I think it's exactly that, though. I think it is the balance. So if you know that you're going to be cut off after 2 pages, and it is an exercise, it's like anything else. It's something we're not used to, right? So we have to just think about it in a way that's strategic. So if you know that 2-page is the cutoff, that's what you're given. A 60-second pitch, a 2-page resume, whatever it is what you're given. You're going to work within that guidance. I often tell folks, for me personally, less is more. So give me the one sentence that ties it all together, and then support that with a couple of key bullet points. Because to your point, when we are doing a word search, we do want to see change management, communication, human resources, people strategy, whatever those key words are. But you also need to supplement that or complement that with a one sentence, if you will, per experience that kind of brings together the real impact that you had. Especially when you're, again, when you've had a couple of experiences, right? When you're junior, you could probably get away with more bullets. When you have more experience, then companies are looking at you and they're going to want to know, what has this individual really accomplished? So if you have to share things like, financial metrics, impact results, that may require a sentence or 2. I would never go beyond 2 sentences. If you're going into your 3rd line, 4th line, 5th line, you're probably saying too much. So I would encourage you to, have an abridged version, but the key is balance. You use the right words, definitely balance of the 2.
Okay. Other things that seem to be tricky, we have some, I'll call them lifers, people who have been at one job for quite some time, which is definitely not my life story. I think the most I've ever was anywhere was 2 years. But some have had multiple jobs. So how do you really best illustrate how you've moved up over time and changed your roles, maybe even changed your departments? And then for those of us like me, where in the past it was definitely perceived jumping around was a red flag, how do you also show your skills that, you've also moved up and gained valuable experiences from being at different places versus consistency moving up or around in one place?
Right. So let me start with
both sides. Yeah.
Yeah, let me start with the first one. And all of this, by the way, is going to, there's so many variables. So I'll start out with the backdrop that says, there are many variables. There are some general rules and guidance, and I can tell you what's worked. But remember, I've been primarily in the corporate sector, professional services with consulting and management consulting and also financial services. That's the industry I know best. However, that said, when you look at somebody who is the lifer, and I guess that would be me. It's interesting. When I chose to leave Booz Allen and start my own firm, and I look back and I'm like, I made a decision when I was with the company celebrating my 15th year. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, nobody stays in companies 15 years anymore. That's crazy. It's unheard of.
Exactly.
Now, in those 15 years, I had 6 different jobs, all within human capital. So I'm a people person. That's my thing, and I'm all about, focusing on the human capital strategy and creating impact and delivering impact through people, right? So that's always been my career trajectory. So it was 15 years with Booz Allen, 15 years in human capital. But yes, I did have 6 opportunities. So what I did was I showcased different. The one that was most recent for me was head of diversity. Prior to that, I was lead of people strategy. During part of my tenure there, I was lead of performance management, leadership development, global relocation services. So I had many different roles. I could speak about those individually, so you want to call them out. If you happen to sit on the side where you've been with the company 15 years, so let's say you've only been in one role, I've progressed, from junior accountant to mid accountant to senior accountant, that's okay too. What you want to show is you want to highlight those incremental responsibilities and those incremental actions and impacts that you had. So it's just more a matter of how you communicate and you stage it. The facts are the facts, and as I said, you can't hide from the fact that you've been with the same company for 15 years. But there are ways to talk about it where you really take a step back and say, even if it was within the same job, what was different, what was new? And challenge yourself. And that's why it's so important to write these resumes and keep them refreshed on a regular basis, right? You do your taxes once a year. You go to the dentist a couple times a year. You take your physical once a year. You should be thinking about updating your resume once a year, even if you're not planning to make a move. This is just be part of what you do. Now, the flip side is for those individuals who had a lot of movement, typically, and I can just tell you my experience, if I see somebody who is 15 or 20 years tenure and they've only stayed in places 2 years, after the fourth 2-year assignment, if it's with a different company, you begin to ask, what is it about this picture? So I think there's a delicate balance there. I think that one also you have to explain it, and there's an opportunity to explain it in the cover letter, right? Because again, you're going to be truthful on your resume. But what you want to do is show how these experiences have hung together. Show how these experiences are part of a very carefully and strategically orchestrated career path. So I was here because I wanted to get the experience doing X. I identified this next opportunity was going to get me closer to the end goal of Y. And you begin to build it. It's like you're telling a story. Your resume is a reflection of you. You are telling a story. So what you want the receiving party to get is a clear understanding around, wow, okay, this person has 20 years of experience, they've moved 4 times. This person has 20 years of experience, they've only been with one employer. This person has 20 years of experience, they've moved 10 times. It's not clear to me which one is better. I have to kind of understand the background. And that's where being able to clearly articulate that, if not in the resume itself, in the cover letter is going to be critically important.
Great. This is another two-sided sword. So
yes.
Question, because it's on both sides of the spectrum. We'll see, so quite often we are now in an economy where there's so many people applying for every job that it seems, one, like it takes forever to get one and to hear back. But if you are someone who keeps getting the overqualification, like you're overqualified, being told that, how do you, because sometimes you have to go, you need to pay your bills. So you're going to go for a job that you were a director, might now have to be a manager. And sometimes people don't know at a full organization, and a manager one place could be higher than a director. A director could be higher than a VP in a different organization. So one, how do you deal with being overqualified on one side? And then how do you come out of the box when you're trying to go after your first manager job, when you're trying to move up for the first time versus trying to, I wouldn't say dummy down, because I always say never dummy down your resume, but how do you also show that this could still be a good opportunity even if you have more than enough skills for it?
Okay, let me start with the last one that you mentioned. That was easier, which was if somebody is now aspiring to the next level opportunity and maybe they haven't had the manager role before. There are a couple of things I would say, right? So if you're thinking about it and you're being truthful and you do in fact meet 50% or more of the qualifications that we talked about, then I would say there is think about the use of language and words on your resume. Also, so titles, for example. You may have been, and you're right, I've seen this in HR quite a bit. Titles are very, very different. So you could be the, manager of finance, you could be the finance lead, you can be the sector lead, you can be the senior supervisor, and it's all the same role. So there, I would say, you can pick the title that best reflects the role and that best positions you for what's next, right? So don't create a title that you didn't have, but within the range of titles that fit, pick the one that you think is most supportive of where you want to go. That's number one. Number two, Identify, look at your resume and be honest. Which of those experiences are the ones that really speak to my having managerial capability? And definitely put those up front, right? So sometimes people have a tough time, they progress, and they want to include everything. So I'm still talking about how I'm answering the phones and doing reception and filing things, but yet I want the manager job. That doesn't belong on your resume. What belongs on your resume are those things that are the more impactful things that's going to get somebody to look at you even if you don't have all the experience they're looking for. The third thing is, again, look for opportunities externally. Jody, your thing is around networking, right, and the importance of networking, and I'm going to support you 1,000% on this one. You know, there are ways to get experience and there are ways to get exposure that is beyond on the job. But there are also opportunities on the job. So if you work for a large company, if you work for a small or mid company, are there duties that you can take on, even if it is as a volunteer opportunity, that will enable you to showcase your managerial skills, maybe even in exchange for somebody giving you a reference, right? So there's things that you can negotiate, but that you really think about it very strategically. So for those that are junior, those would be some of the things to consider. For those that are the more qualified, and this is really a tough one because you're right, and my heart goes out to you. I know how difficult it is in this market, and if you've been in a place for a long time, and suddenly you're in a place where I need to find a new position and I'm being told I'm overqualified, the same would apply for you, you know. So here I would say look at your responsibilities and really take a look at the title. Maybe you don't want to say Vice President of HR. Maybe you just want to say HR lead. You're still being truthful. You were an HR lead. But lead can lend itself to different levels. Vice President, people automatically think, oh my gosh, can I even afford this person? But even beyond that, they're way too qualified. They're going to be bored here. So I would definitely say that you should look at other titles. And if you're not sure and you Google Society of Human Resource Management and just do a title search, you can get a listing of different titles that fall within your area of expertise. And pick the one that, again, might not intimidate, let's say, an employer who might think that, again, in looking at the title, this individual might not really be interested for the job. That's one thing. The other thing is, and again, this is playing a little bit in the gray, but it's still being truthful. I always tell my clients that the minute you have and you reach that milestone of 20 years of work experience, maybe even 25, you know, I tend to tell my clients, if you've been in business, God bless you, 30, 40, 50 years in some cases, all people need to know that you have 20 plus years experience, 25 plus years experience. Don't say any more. So there are certain milestones that you just stop there. You don't, you know, I wouldn't say 20 years if I really had 28, but I would say 20 or more, over 20 years, over 15 years. That I think is reasonable. So find that threshold that's right for you, but definitely, and it's unfortunate, but the reality is that when companies start looking for filling positions and they're looking for next generation leaders, more often than not, the supply is just, it's amazing the supply that's out there, right? There's a lot of talent out there vying for limited roles. For those of you, a side pitch, by the way, for those of you that are on the call that are either in or interested in technology, I will say that, you know, sky's the limit there, right? We know that by 2020, 60% of all, 70% almost of all new opportunities are going to be in the technology space in some way, shape, or form. So there should be ample opportunity. But for all the other sectors, I think with the exception of healthcare, not a lot of them are growing. And therefore, your ability to, again, I wouldn't use the word dummy down, but find a way to play with the words and the experiences so that the average reader looking at it will place you right where that opportunity is. It's not going to place you as 10 years too senior or 10 years too junior, but instead right where that opportunity is.
Yeah, so that answers the other kind of question of, yes, you definitely need to have more than one resume. You have a base, and depending on what kind of job that you are applying for, you kind of play with the parts and the bullets, and if one has more marketing, you need to put more marketing bullets. If one has more IT, you need to put more tech bullets, because that's what's important to that company. You look at what's at the top of a job resume is what an HR director is looking for, so you have to look at what a company is really looking for. If it says required versus optional versus would be nice, right? It would be nice if you speak Spanish, but if it says must be bilingual and you are not, you do not apply for that because you will not get it. You know, so just be mindful of that. The last question that we're going to kind of morph into one is there's some folks who have been laid off or have some of these gaps and have had great work experience. They've been laid off, so for real reasons. The economic downturn, a company has downsized, not for their own fault. It's not like they were coming in late for 10 years and they finally got fired. So how do you, show that, or not really, I always say leave it up to the discussion, not make it a blemish on your resume, as well as those who really need to show that they're brand new and, need to show some experience. So those that have the experience and can't show that, we all have parts that we don't want to show. So how do you kind of cover up but still be able to discuss it, or, how does it show up on your resume?
Right. So
Yes,
I think here is where, remember the discussion earlier around the different types of resumes? So in this example, I would probably not go with a chronological resume, but instead go with a functional or a hybrid, because then, what you zero in on first is the experience. The other thing I would say is even if you're not working and you're in between jobs, there is no reason why you can't be volunteering somewhere. And I don't care if it's an hour a month, I don't even care if it's an hour a quarter, but you want something on your resume. What you don't want is a big gap that shows that you had no activity professionally, in 3, 6, 9, 12 months. So there is an opportunity to do something and capture that something and get credit for that something, even if it is volunteer basis, so that you're actually showing that continuity on your resume. The third piece that I would say, and again, I'm in the consulting business, right? I have a legitimate consulting business now that I'm running as an LLC. There are a ton of consultants out there, and many do not have their own businesses. They just operate as a quote-unquote a consultant. So, whether you volunteer, and again, ideally pick a volunteering opportunity that in some way connects with where you want to go industry-wise, or connects with where you want to go role-wise, so that you're actually building those skills as you're volunteering, and or provide some pro bono consulting to refresh and keep your skills up to date. And then, also, again, back to the networking piece, get yourself out there and talk to people about what you're doing. I network quite a bit, and I can tell you, I always find it interesting when people come up to me and say, oh, I've been out of work for 6 months. They lead with that. Don't lead with that. Lead with what you do have. Oh, well, I'm in transition. What does that mean? I mean, what does that mean you're in transition? So again, lead with who you are. I'm a human capital expert. I've been in the business 20 years. I started my own firm. I'm consulting. I'm helping, the whatever foundation build their strategy. Talk about what you're doing in a way that's, again, very compelling. The minute somebody talks about in transition, unless you're a recruiter or a headhunter, again, that's going to repel the person and not bring them in. The other thing is, even if you are a recruiter or a headhunter, what's going to happen is you're going to wonder, so why is this person unemployed? Even though most people who read the news and who live in today's society know that there is, a significant issue with employment, right? But that said, I would lead with what you have, and I would go out of my way to ensure that even if there's a gap in full-time paid employment, that there is no gap on my resume because I'm showing that I'm doing something.
Wow. Well, Lucy, I just want to thank you. I know that this audience wants to thank you. I think we probably got the most. Are we going to get the slides, or are we going to get the presentation from this one? And you are really setting us up for our next Digital Career Success Series with my very own mentor, Michael Heiter. And it's job interviews. Now you got one, how do you nail it? And if they follow what you said today and take your advice about their resume and really refresh it, reboot it, renew it, redo it, I think that they'll be getting more interviews. But sometimes once you get an interview, you don't know what to do. There are game-changing ways to be interviewed and to make sure that you nail it and get the job of your dreams. And also sometimes you get turned down for a job, or you can say no. Saying no is also powerful. Sometimes you find out in an interview that the boss that you're going to work with is not exactly who you thought he or she would be. So an interview is still your process, just like a resume is your way of getting into an organization. Now you're in. And Michael will enlighten you all on how to utilize the fabulous resume that you just wrote, thanks to Lucy, into your resume, into your interview. So I just want to thank you, Lucy, for joining us. I hope you guys will join us on March 9th. We are really looking forward to this particular session because Michael, like Lucy, has had 20-plus years in human capital, in diversity, and really knows all the sectors and has interviewed everyone at all levels. So come with your questions, invite your friends, and Lucy, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. Your presentation was stellar.
You are quite welcome, and I appreciate everybody on the phone. And also, Michael Hyder is a familiar name to me. He did some work for Booz Allen, so it's nice to see him on the screen as well.
See, I try to bring all my folks together, a little kumbaya. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your afternoon. If you're in New York, please stay dry. See you soon.